Bradley's hand closed around the watch in Lily's grip. 300 investors turned at Lily's scream. "Worthless junk from a worthless woman," my son said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. The Cartier hit marble. Gears scattered across the stone. The white enamel dial cracked into 3 pieces. I knelt among the wreckage, gathering springs and screws. Then I saw it. Behind the balance wheel, where nothing should exist, something glinted. My fingers stopped. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from. I appreciate you. My name is Franklin Yates, 62 years old and staring at broken pieces spread across the same maple workbench where I've worked for 40 years. The Cartier's wreckage caught the first gray light filtering through the window that faces Margaret's garden. Cracked case, shattered dial in 3 pieces. Gears no larger than pinheads scattered like accusations. And behind it all, Margaret's photograph watching from the shelf where her music boxes waited in silence. I picked up the balance wheel with tweezers. My hands, despite the arthritis that had crept in over the last decade, stayed steady. 40 years of restoration work had taught them patience even when the rest of me wanted to put my fist through the wall. Geneva gave me those hands. 1982, I was 23 years old, working under Henri Dubois in his workshop overlooking Lake Geneva. The old Swiss master had hands like surgical instruments and a temperament to match. He'd watch me struggle with a hairspring for hours before offering a single word of correction. Most American students quit within 6 months. I stayed 3 years. "You have the patience," Henry told me on my last day, "but patience without precision is wasted effort. And precision without love for the work itself is just mechanics." He gave me a spring bar tool that day. 40 years. Still there on the pegboard behind me, its wooden handle worn smooth from decades of use. I reached back and touched it without looking, the way you'd touch a talisman. When I returned to Chicago in 1985, I opened my restoration shop on Archer Avenue with $3,000 in savings and a reputation that existed only in my own mind. The space was a converted storefront between a polished bakery and a shoe repair. I specialized in pre-war Cartier and Patek Philippe pieces, the kind of watches most jewelers sent out rather than attempt themselves. Word spread slowly. A collector in Lake Forest brought me a 1908 Patek with a cracked mainspring. Then his friend brought a water-damaged Vacheron. Then a dealer from New York shipped me an Art Deco Cartier that 3 Swiss workshops had deemed unrepairable. I fixed it in 11 days. By 1990, I had a waiting list. By 2000, collectors flew pieces in from London and Tokyo. I never advertised, never needed to. The watches themselves were my testimonials, each one leaving my bench running better than it had in decades. Margaret understood this. She understood everything about me from the moment we met. 2 kids on the South Side with dreams bigger than our circumstances. Her father ran a butcher shop on Halsted Street, hands perpetually red from his work, the way mine would become perpetually stained with machine oil. She had fierce intelligence packed into a small frame and opinions she never hesitated to share. We married in 1984, a small ceremony at St. Mary of Perpetual Help reception in her father's backyard. I was 25 and broke and completely certain I'd found the only woman I'd ever want. Margaret worked at Kirkland & Ellis, one of Chicago's most respected law firms. She typed contracts, organized case files, sat through depositions that would have put most people to sleep. But she absorbed everything: partnership agreements, ownership structures, the 1,000 ways people tried to protect what they'd built, and the 1,000 ways others tried to take it. "You learn how the world really works," she told me once, "by watching lawyers prepare for the worst." I didn't understand what she meant then. I do now. Bradley came in 1986. Margaret took 5 years off, then returned to work part-time until he started school. Those were good years. Tight, the way young families with single incomes are tight, but good. We bought the Bridgeport Bungalow in 1983 for $34,000 and paid it off in 15 years, a month at a time. Bradley grew up in my workshop. He'd sit on a stool beside me while I worked, asking questions about escapements and balance wheels. watching my hands with the same concentration I'd once watched Henri's. When he was 12, I taught him to identify movements by sound alone. He had a gift for it. "He's smart," Margaret said one night after Bradley had gone to bed. "Too smart, maybe. He wants more than we can give him." I told her that was a good thing, that children should want more than their parents had, that reaching beyond your circumstances was how progress worked. She nodded but didn't look convinced. January 2008. We sat at our kitchen table with papers spread between coffee cups. Bradley was 22, fresh out of Northwestern's business program, burning with an idea for a technology consulting firm that would help companies navigate the digital transformation reshaping American business. He needed capital, $127,000, a figure he'd calculated with the precision I'd taught him. Our savings totaled $43,000. The bungalow, paid off and appraised at $110,000, could secure the rest. Margaret looked at me across the table. We'd been married 24 years. I knew her silences better than most people knew words. "We could lose everything," she said, "or we could give him a chance." Franklin. She picked up the papers, flipping through Bradley's business plan for the third time. "If we do this, we do it right. I've seen too many families destroyed by handshake deals." She spent 3 weeks drafting the terms, a sole proprietorship deed with me listed as owner and Bradley as operational manager, performance milestones that would transfer ownership gradually over 5 years, formal documentation of the investment, the expectations, the path forward. "He's our son," I said when she showed me the paperwork. "Is all this necessary?" "He's our son today," Margaret replied, "but he'll be a businessman tomorrow. And businessmen forget where they came from. I signed the papers anyway. So did Bradley, his signature shaky with excitement and gratitude. The first year, he worked from our dining room table. I'd come home from the shop and find him on the phone with potential clients, notes scattered across the surface where we'd eaten thousands of Sunday dinners. Margaret would make coffee at midnight when his calls ran late. That first Christmas, Bradley broke down crying at the dinner table. "I'll repay you," he said, voice cracking, "tenfold, 100-fold. Everything I build because you believed in me." Margaret reached across and squeezed his hand. I watched my son weep with the pure emotion of someone who understood exactly what had been sacrificed for his dream. I want to remember him that way, the grateful boy, the one who understood what we'd sacrificed. The business grew faster than any of us expected. By 2011, Bradley had an office downtown and 6 employees. By 2016, he'd pivoted into venture capital, using the consulting profits to invest in early-stage technology companies. By 2021, he was being profiled in Crain's Chicago Business, photographed in suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment had been. The magazine showed him in an office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Our dining room table was nowhere in sight. The first time I heard him called a self-made visionary was in 2022. A glossy magazine spread about Chicago's rising entrepreneurs. I read the phrase 3 times, waiting for the correction that never came. Self-made, $127,000. A second mortgage. 18 months of Margaret working extra shifts to cover our bills while Bradley's company found its footing. Sunday dinners where we ate cheaper cuts so our son could eat better. Built from nothing. That's what they called him. Bradley met Priscilla at a Nantucket fundraiser in 2020. The Winthrops of Boston, shipping fortune since before the Civil War, the kind of family that documents bloodlines like property deeds and considers anyone whose grandparents worked with their hands to be fundamentally lesser. That first Christmas, after their engagement, Priscilla came to our bungalow. She walked through the rooms Margaret had decorated with 30 years of care, looked at the furniture we'd bought secondhand and refinished ourselves, and said, "Maybe we could do dinner somewhere nice instead." Bradley laughed, told me later it was just a joke. It wasn't. The erasure happened slowly. Interview by interview, gala by gala, my son became someone who had emerged fully formed from his own brilliance. His parents were supportive but uninvolved in business. His background was humble without specifics. The South Side disappeared. The watchmaking father disappeared. The legal secretary mother disappeared. In 2023, Bradley gave a TED Talk about visionary leadership. I watched it alone in my workshop, Margaret too sick by then to join me. 18 minutes of polished wisdom about building something from nothing, about the courage to bet on yourself, about the loneliness of being a self-made success in a world that doesn't understand your vision. Not once did he mention us. Not once did he acknowledge that his first office was our dining room table, that his seed money came from a second mortgage, that his mother had drafted the ownership structure that protected everyone involved. I closed the video at minute 9 and picked up a 1928 long jeans. The crystal needed replacing. Margaret noticed the changes before I did. During our walks through her garden, she'd share observations I wasn't ready to hear. "He's ashamed of us, Franklin. He's busy. Success changes people. It doesn't have to change them like this." I counseled patience, told her Bradley would remember who raised him, told her success would mature rather than corrupt, told her the grateful boy who wept at our dinner table was still inside the man who introduced his in-laws at charity galas while we watched from home. Margaret listened. She nodded. She didn't argue. But 3 months before her diagnosis, she took the Cartier pocket watch to a Swiss specialist in New York. She told me it needed cleaning. She was gone 2 days and came back without explanation. I didn't ask questions. I should have. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctor spoke in probabilities and timelines, while Margaret held my hand with the same calm she'd shown when we signed the mortgage papers in 2008. I closed the shop that afternoon. 40 years of tools and clients and reputation packed away in a single day. Harvey took over my outstanding commissions. I never went back. 18 months. That's what the doctors gave us. We made it to 17 months and 6 days. I managed her medications, adjusted pillows at 3 in the morning, read to her from the books she'd loved, Jane Austen and P.D. James and the Agatha Christie mysteries she'd collected since high school. When she couldn't hold a book anymore, I played her music boxes. The sunset ritual we'd shared for 30 years continued until the end. The smell of brass polish and machine oil clung to my clothes even after washing, and she said it comforted her. Bradley visited 3 times. 3 times in 17 months. Each visit lasted under 2 hours. Each time, his phone buzzed with messages he couldn't ignore. Emails that demanded immediate attention, a world that needed him more than his dying mother did. The 3rd visit, Margaret asked him about Lily, about the company, about his life. Bradley answered while checking his screen, giving her the distracted half-attention you'd give a stranger at a cocktail party. After he left, Margaret cried. The only time I saw her cry during the whole illness. Her last day was a Sunday. Late October, with the trees outside our bedroom window turned gold and red. The sunset light fell across her face in a way that made her look 25 again. The fierce girl from the South Side who told me exactly who she was on our first date and never apologized for it. She pressed the Cartier into my hands. The pocket watch that had belonged to her grandfather, passed down through 3 generations. I knew every gear inside that case, had cleaned it a dozen times over the years. For Lily, she whispered. Her grip on my fingers was stronger than it had any right to be. When the time is right, promise me, I promise. You'll know when, Margaret, you'll know. She died at sunset with her favorite music box playing a Chopin nocturne and my hand wrapped around hers. Now I live alone in the Bridgeport bungalow. 40 years of tools on the walls. Margaret's music boxes on their shelves. Her photograph watching over the workbench where I spent a career building something she'd been right about all along. The patient accumulation of skill. The quiet dignity of honest work. The value of what others overlook. Bradley hasn't called in 6 months. The $127,000 was never repaid, never acknowledged, never mentioned in any of the profiles or interviews or TED Talks about his self-made success. Lily visits when Priscilla allows it, once a month, sometimes less. She's 8 years old with her grandmother's fierce intelligence and her father's blue eyes. She asks about Margaret constantly, about the music boxes, about what Grandma was like when she was young. I tell her everything. The butcher's daughter from the South Side, the legal secretary who understood contracts better than most lawyers, The woman who planted the garden outside my window and tended it for 30 years. The mother who loved her son so much she prepared for the day he might betray her. Lily winds the music boxes with careful fingers. She asks questions. I answer honestly. She is the only uncorrupted part of my family still within reach. I look down at the broken Cartier spread across my workbench. The watch Margaret had trusted me to give Lily when the time was right. The watch Bradley had smashed against marble in front of 300 investors and his screaming daughter. Behind the balance wheel, something still glinted. Margaret had hidden something inside, something she wanted me to find at precisely this moment. My hands were steady as I reached for my tweezers. Margaret had taught them that. Bradley met Priscilla at a Nantucket fundraiser in the summer of 2020. I learned this detail from a society column Margaret found online, not from our son. The photograph showed Bradley in white linen beside a woman with cheekbones like architecture and a smile that calculated value before offering warmth. The caption identified her as Priscilla Winthrop, daughter of Harrison and Eleanor Winthrop of Boston, shipping fortune since before the Civil War. Margaret studied the photograph for a long time. She said nothing, but that night she pulled out the folder containing our original investment documents, made copies, every page. I asked her why. Insurance, she said, the kind that doesn't expire. The first Christmas Priscilla attended our home was December 2021. I'd spent 2 weeks preparing, fresh paint in the living room, new curtains Margaret had sewn herself, the Waterford crystal we'd received as a wedding gift, finally taken from its box after 26 years. Priscilla arrived in a cashmere coat that cost more than our mortgage payment. She walked through the rooms Margaret had decorated with 3 decades of care. Her eyes moved from the second-hand furniture to the hand-sewn curtains to Margaret's music boxes. She didn't touch anything, the photographs on the walls documenting 40 years of life, the music boxes arranged on their shelves like a small museum of memory. She paused in the doorway to the kitchen, where Margaret was pulling a ham from the oven, the same recipe her mother had used, passed down through 3 generations of South Side women. Couldn't we do dinner somewhere nice instead? Bradley laughed, a sharp sound I didn't recognize. She's joking, Mom. Priscilla smiled, the kind of smile that showed teeth without reaching the eyes. She wasn't joking. We all knew it. Margaret kept carving the ham. I poured wine. We ate at the table where Bradley had done his homework, where he'd wept with gratitude when we handed him the check that would build his empire. Priscilla picked at her food and checked her phone 11 times. I counted. After they left, Margaret washed the Waterford crystal by hand and returned it to its box. We won't need these again, she said. The erasure began with small revisions. In early 2022, Bradley gave his first major interview to a technology blog. The reporter asked about his background, his path to founding the company. My parents were supportive, Bradley said. I read the transcript 3 times, but they weren't really involved in the business side. Different generation, you know. They didn't understand what I was trying to build. Supportive but uninvolved. Didn't understand. $127,000. A second mortgage. 18 months of Margaret working double shifts while Bradley's first venture found its footing, the ownership structure she'd drafted herself, applying everything she'd learned in 18 years at Kirkland & Ellis. Didn't understand. I called Bradley that evening. His assistant answered and said he was in meetings until 7. He didn't call back. The pattern accelerated. Later that year, a profile in Crane's Chicago Business described Bradley as a first-generation entrepreneur who had built his company from nothing but vision and determination. The article mentioned his Northwestern degree, his early career at a consulting firm, his marriage to Priscilla Winthrop. No mention of Bridgeport, no mention of a watchmaker father or legal secretary mother. No mention of the dining room table where he'd run his first business or the parents who'd eaten cheaper cuts so he could eat better. Margaret clipped the article and filed it with her insurance documents. What are you keeping all this for? I asked. Patterns, she said. Lawyers teach you to document patterns. In March 2004, Bradley's office caught fire. I learned about it from the Chicago Tribune, not from my son. The article described minor damage to the building, no injuries, an electrical fault traced to aging wiring. Bradley received a $340,000 insurance settlement for equipment and documents destroyed in the blaze. Documents. The word stuck in my mind. I called Bradley's office again. This time, his assistant said he was traveling. I left a message asking about the fire, about what had been lost. He never called back. 6 weeks later, I received a form letter from the Illinois Secretary of State's office, a copy of newly filed incorporation documents for Yates Holdings, LLC, listing Bradley Yates as sole founder and owner. My name appeared nowhere in the paperwork. I drove downtown to Bradley's new office, 47th floor, glass walls, a view of Lake Michigan that seemed to stretch to Michigan. His assistant said he was unavailable. I waited 3 hours in the lobby before a security guard asked me to leave. That night, Margaret and I sat at our kitchen table with the new incorporation documents spread between us. He destroyed them, Margaret said. Her voice was flat. The fire, the original paperwork. He burned it all. You don't know that. The timing, Franklin. The new filings. The insurance money. She looked at me with eyes that had spent 18 years watching lawyers build cases. This is what guilty looks like when it thinks it's being clever. I wanted to argue, wanted to believe our son had simply made a clerical error, forgotten to include us in the new paperwork, been too busy to return calls. But Margaret had always been the one who saw clearly when I couldn't. What do we do? I asked. Nothing yet. She gathered the papers and added them to her file. But we prepare. Bradley's TED Talk came in 2023. Margaret was already sick by then, the diagnosis 6 months behind us, the treatments beginning to hollow her out from the inside. I watched the video alone in my workshop while she rested in the next room. 18 minutes. Bradley walked the stage in a suit that cost more than my best month at the shop. Wireless microphone clipped to his lapel, confidence radiating from every gesture. He spoke about visionary leadership, about betting on yourself, about the courage to build something from nothing. I came from humble beginnings, he said at minute 4. I learned early that if you want something in this world, you have to create it yourself. Nobody's going to hand it to you. Humble beginnings. No South Side. No Bridgeport bungalow. No dining room table. The hardest part of success is accepting that you've earned it, he said at minute 12. Understanding that you built this. Not luck, not circumstance. You built this, not luck, self-made. The word appeared on screen behind him in letters 3 feet tall. That's not arrogance. That's accountability. Self-made. $127,000 that had never been repaid, never acknowledged, never mentioned in any interview or press release or TED Talk about visionary leadership. I closed the video at minute 9. The 1928 long jeans on my bench needed a new crystal. The work required focus. I gave it focus. The visits became obligations. Thanksgiving meant 30 minutes of Bradley checking his watch before announcing he had somewhere else to be. Christmas meant perfunctory exchanges of gifts, followed by excuses about traffic, about early flights, about the demands that pulled him in directions we couldn't understand. Birthday calls lasted 90 seconds if I was lucky. Bradley's voice already distracted before the conversation began, already calculating the minimum investment required to maintain the appearance of a relationship. How's the shop? He'd ask, and I'd tell him I'd closed it 2 years ago to care for his mother. Right, he'd say. Listen, I've got a meeting in 5 minutes. We'll catch up soon. We never caught up. Margaret entered hospice on a Tuesday in September 2024. I called Bradley's office. His assistant said she'd relay the message. 3 days later, a fruit basket arrived by courier. The card read, "Thinking of you, B&P." Pre-printed condolences with a stamped signature. Margaret looked at the basket for a long time. Pears arranged in neat rows. Ribbon in company colors. Well, she said, at least now we know. The funeral was October 15th. Bradley arrived 20 minutes late, slipping into the back pew while Father Kowalski read from Corinthians. I watched him check his phone twice during the homily. When we processed to the cemetery, he walked at the back of the procession with his shoulders hunched against the wind. At the graveside, he stood beside me for exactly 11 minutes. I counted because counting gave me something to do besides scream. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. His eyes were on his phone. She was a good mother. A good mother. The woman who'd sacrificed 18 years of career advancement to raise him, who'd drafted the paperwork that gave him his start, who'd eaten cheaper cuts so he could build an empire, reduced to a good mother in a tone you'd use for a neighbor you barely knew. "I've got a flight to Davos," he said. "Leadership summit, non-negotiable." He left before they finished lowering the casket. I stood alone in the October wind and watched them cover Margaret with earth, and I understood that I had lost two people that day. My wife to cancer, my son to whatever had eaten his soul from the inside out. Priscilla didn't attend the funeral. Bradley mentioned a scheduling conflict. He didn't elaborate. The financial silence was the cruelest cut. Bradley never repaid the $127,000, never acknowledged the second mortgage, never offered to help when my shop struggled during the recession, when clients delayed payments and suppliers demanded cash, when I lay awake at 3 a.m. calculating how long we could survive on savings alone. Meanwhile, Bradley purchased the West Loop penthouse, $2.4 million. 3,000 square feet with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of everything his parents had never been invited to see. He filled it with furniture that cost more than our house. The Rolex collection came next. 7 watches, one for each day of the week. I'd seen photographs in a magazine profile, the pieces arranged in a custom display case, gleaming under museum lighting. $340,000 worth of precision engineering that my son couldn't repair or even identify the movements of. He wore them the way a child wears a costume, believing the appearance could substitute for understanding. The library was the final insult. A climate-controlled room filled with first-edition books he never read, purchased at auction for prestige rather than pleasure. The reporter who wrote about it described Bradley's passion for literature. I'd never seen him finish a book in his life. One evening, 6 months after Margaret's death, I gathered my courage and called Bradley directly. The phone rang 5 times before he answered. "Dad." "What's up?" "I wanted to talk about the money." Silence. I heard traffic in the background, the sound of a car door closing. "What money?" "The $127,000. The seed investment. The second mortgage we took on the house." More silence. When Bradley spoke again, his voice had the careful neutrality of a man measuring his words. "That was a long time ago, Dad. 18 years. I'm not asking for interest, just the principal. Look, I'll have my people look into it, okay? There might be some tax implications we need to consider. Let me get back to you." He never got back to me. The next time I called, his assistant said he was traveling. The time after that, she said he was in meetings. Eventually, I stopped calling. The invitation arrived 3 months before the gala, a heavy envelope with embossed lettering and the Yates Holdings logo in gold leaf. The annual investor gala at the Peninsula Hotel. Black tie, October 15th, the same date as Margaret's funeral. I didn't think Bradley remembered. Inside the envelope, a handwritten note from Priscilla. "Bradley thought you might like to attend. Lily has been asking about you. Please RSVP by September 30th. Dress appropriately." Dress appropriately. As if I might arrive in overalls and embarrass the self-made visionary in front of his investors. I learned later that Priscilla had opposed my invitation. Optics, she called it. The working-class father didn't fit the narrative Bradley had spent years constructing. But Lily, 8 years old and fierce like her grandmother, had worn her father down. "Grandpa has to come," she'd insisted. "He's family," Bradley relented. Probably assumed I'd stay invisible among 300 investors worth $2.3 billion combined. One elderly watchmaker in a crowd of wealth managers and tech entrepreneurs, easy to overlook, easier to forget. I spent 2 weeks deciding what to bring, not what to wear, what to bring. Margaret had wanted Lily to have the watch. "When the time is right," she'd whispered, pressing the Cartier into my hands on her last day. "Promise me." I'd promised. I'd spent 14 months wondering when the time would be right, what sign I should wait for, how I'd know the moment Margaret had seen so clearly. A celebration of the company our seed money had built. 300 people gathered to toast Bradley's success. Lily in the same room, old enough to understand what a grandmother's gift meant when the time was right. I took the watch to my bench and cleaned it for the first time since Margaret's death. The 1923 Cartier gleamed under my daylight lamp, its gold case catching light it hadn't seen in years. I polished every surface, checked every spring, made sure the movement ran true. My hands knew this watch better than any other. I'd cleaned it dozens of times over 4 decades, maintaining it for Margaret the way I maintained everything she loved. But that night, working under the lamp while her photograph watched from the shelf, I noticed something I'd never noticed before. A slight irregularity in the weight distribution, almost imperceptible. The kind of detail only 40 years of training would catch. I set the watch down and stared at it for a long time. Margaret had taken it to a specialist in New York 2 years before her death. For cleaning, she'd said, a trip that lasted 2 days when a cleaning should have taken hours. I picked up my loupe and examined the case again. Then I put it away and polished the crystal until it shone. Whatever Margaret had hidden inside that watch, she'd hidden it for a reason. She'd wanted me to find it at the right moment, not before. I slipped the Cartier into the pocket of my best cardigan and drove downtown to the Peninsula Hotel. The sunset painted the city gold and red, the same colors that had fallen across Margaret's face on her last day. I thought I was delivering a gift. I thought I was honoring my wife's final wish. I had no idea I was walking into the moment Margaret had prepared for all along. The Peninsula Hotel ballroom dwarfed everything I'd known. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling like frozen waterfalls, scattering light across 300 faces I didn't recognize. Ice sculptures bearing the Yates Holdings logo guarded champagne towers at every corner, sweating in the warm air. The marble floor reflected everything back, doubled, tripled. A hall of mirrors where men adjusted cufflinks and reflections, and women checked their posture in the polished stone. I stood just inside the entrance in my best wool cardigan over a crisp Oxford shirt, my polished leather shoes catching the light, my vintage Omega Seamaster on my wrist, dressed well by South Side standards, invisible by Nantucket ones. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne flutes. He didn't offer me one. His eyes moved through me like I was a pillar, an architectural feature, something that belonged to the building rather than the event. The crowd shifted in patterns I couldn't read, men in suits that cost more than my car, women in gowns that probably had names, designers I'd never heard of. Their laughter rang out in practiced cadences, the sound of people who'd learned young how to project amusement without revealing vulnerability. I moved along the wall, keeping my hand in my pocket, the Cartier's weight against my palm. Margaret's gift, the last thing she'd entrusted to me. Then I saw her. Lily stood near the center of the room in a blue dress with a white sash, her dark hair pulled back with a ribbon. 8 years old, and already learning to navigate these spaces, holding a glass of sparkling cider like the adults held their champagne. She looked so much like Margaret had at that age, the same fierce intelligence in her eyes, the same way she held her chin slightly raised against a world that underestimated her. Our eyes met across 30 feet of marble and wealth. The corners of her mouth lifted, her shoulders dropped, her eyes found mine and held. "Grandpa," she handed her cider to a startled waiter and ran, actually ran, her dress shoes clicking against the marble, her ribbon coming loose, her smile wide enough to split her face. I knelt to catch her, my knees protesting the sudden movement. She hit me hard, arms wrapping around my neck, her cheek pressed against mine. "You came," she whispered. "Mommy said you might not. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." I held her for a long moment. Around us, the gala continued. Champagne flowed. Investors networked. Money courted money in the ancient dance of the privileged. None of it mattered. This did. This small body in my arms, this fierce grip, this voice that still sounded like home. Priscilla appeared at the edge of my vision. Bradley's wife stood 15 feet away with a champagne flute in her manicured hand, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Calculation, maybe, or disapproval, or both. "Lily, darling," she called. Her voice carried the specific tone of public motherhood, warmth performed for observers. "Let your grandfather breathe." Lily pulled back, but didn't let go of my hand. "Can we sit somewhere, Grandpa?" I want to show you something I learned at school. Of course. We found a quiet corner near a window, away from the champagne towers and the investors and the ice sculptures sweating into their silver bases. 2 chairs that might have been Louis Saive reproductions, or might have been authentic antiques worth more than my house. I couldn't tell and didn't care. Lily settled into her chair with her legs dangling above the floor. She'd grown since I'd last seen her 2 months ago. Her face was losing its baby roundness, sharpening toward the woman she'd become. I learned about clocks, she said, in science class, about pendulums and gears and how they all work together. Did you now? She nodded, earnest. The teacher said that old watches are like puzzles. Every piece has to fit exactly right, or the whole thing stops working. I reached into my pocket. The Cartier's weight shifted against my fingers, smooth gold, still warm from my body heat. Your grandmother understood that, I said. She understood how all the pieces fit together. I drew out the watch and held it in my palm. The 18-karat gold case caught the chandelier light, throwing tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. The hunter case was closed, the way it had been since Margaret pressed it into my hands on her last day. Lily's eyes went wide. That's beautiful. It belonged to your great-great-grandfather. He brought it from Poland when he came to America, before your grandmother was born, before I was born. It's traveled a long way to get here. It's really old, Lily breathed. She leaned forward, her hands clasped in her lap, not reaching but wanting to. 103 years old, made by Cartier in 1923. I pressed the crown, and the hunter case opened with the soft click that had been sounding for a century. The white enamel dial gleamed, Roman numerals standing sharp against the surface, blued steel hands at 4047. Your grandmother wanted you to have it. Me, when the time was right. That's what she said. I looked at my granddaughter, at Margaret's eyes looking back at me from a small face. I think she'd say, "This is it. Can I hold it?" I placed the watch carefully in her small hands. The gold case nearly filled her palm, the chain spilling between her fingers like a metal river. She held it the way I'd taught her to hold delicate things, with her fingertips spread wide, supporting but not gripping. It's heavy, she said. 103 years of history. That's what you're holding. Every generation that touched it, every hand that wound it, every person who checked the time and went about their day. Your grandmother's grandfather, your grandmother's father, your grandmother, and now you. Lily's thumb traced the edge of the case. I miss her. I know, sweetheart. I miss her too. Daddy doesn't talk about her. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. He says she didn't understand business, Lily continued, her voice small. He says she was from a different time, but she understood me. She always understood me. She understood everything that mattered. For a moment, we sat together in our quiet corner, the Gala swirling around us like a river around a stone. Lily held the watch, and I watched her hold it, and the 100 years between her great-great-grandfather's Poland and this Chicago ballroom collapsed into something I could almost touch. Then Bradley's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "What's this?" He stood 5 feet away, champagne in one hand, his smile tight, calculated. Behind him, Priscilla hovered with her arms crossed, her face arranged into careful neutrality. Bradley was already moving before I could respond. His free hand shot out and plucked the watch from Lily's grip, the chain slithering through her fingers as the weight transferred from her palm to his. "Where did you get this junk?" The word landed like a slap. Around us, conversations stuttered, heads turned. The nearest investors pretended not to watch, while watching with every fiber of their attention. "It was your mother's," I said quietly. "She wanted Lily to have it." Bradley held the watch up between 2 fingers, dangling it like a dead mouse. The gold case spun slowly, catching light, throwing reflections across his face. "My mother," his voice pitched louder, heads turning at surrounding tables. "My mother spent her whole life collecting worthless garbage. Music boxes and old watches and sentimental trash nobody with real taste would keep in their attic." I stood slowly. My knees ached from kneeling to catch Lily, from crouching beside the chairs, from 62 years of living in a body that remembered every mile. I rose to my full height, which wasn't much next to Bradley's gym-sculpted frame, and met his eyes. "Bradley, not here. Please, not here?" He laughed, the champagne in his glass sloshing. "Why not here? These people should know what I came from. Should know about the junk my mother treasured more than she ever treasured my success. She treasured you. She treasured this." He shook the watch, the chain whipping. "This worthless piece of antique garbage. You know what this represents, Dad? Everything wrong with your generation. Sentiment over substance. Hanging on to the past instead of building the future." Lily sat still in her chair, her hands still cupped in front of her where the watch had been. Her eyes were wet. "Bradley, please," I said again. "Give me the watch. We can talk about this somewhere private." "Private?" His lip curled. A vein pulsed at his temple. "You want private? You come into my event, in front of my investors, and try to corrupt my daughter with this trash, and you want private." The ballroom had gone quiet. 300 people stood motionless, champagne forgotten, watching the family drama unfold with the same focus they'd give a stock ticker in freefall. "Worthless junk," Bradley declared, his voice filling the space, from a worthless woman who never understood anything about building real value. "Daddy, no!" Lily's scream pierced the silence. She lunged forward from her chair, reaching for the watch, for her father, for something to stop what was coming. Bradley raised his arm and hurled the Cartier against the marble floor. The sound it made was small, a crack, like a branch snapping in winter. But in the silence of the ballroom, it echoed like a gunshot. The hunter case hit the stone and split open on impact. Gears scattered across the polished marble, tiny brass circles spinning away in every direction. The white enamel dial broke into 3 pieces, the Roman numerals separating from each other as if the face of the watch was coming apart in grief. A spring coiled away under a nearby table, rolling into the shadows. This was everything Margaret had left me. I knelt, my hands were even. 40 years of training held them even when the rest of me wanted to break the way the watch had broken. I reached for the nearest gear, a tiny brass wheel no larger than a pinhead, and picked it up with the same care I'd used to restore 10,000 watches. "This was your mother's heart, Bradley." The words came out as a whisper. I didn't have breath for more. Bradley snorted. I heard him turn, heard his champagne glass clink against another. "Sentiment over substance," he said, his voice already moving away. "Classic." I kept gathering pieces. The cracked case, still warm from Lily's hands. The dial in 3 pieces, Roman numerals staring up at me like accusations. A spring, a screw, the balance wheel, its hairspring still coiled tight. My trained eye cataloged each component as I collected it. Mainspring, intact but dislocated. Escapement, scattered but recoverable. Gear train, missing at least 3 components, probably rolled under the nearby furniture. I'd restored worse. I'd rebuilt watches that had been through fires, floods, forgotten in drawers for decades. This damage was significant, but not irreversible. Given time and patience, I could bring Margaret's watch back to life. Then I saw it. Behind where the balance wheel had sat, a compartment had cracked open. Not a natural feature of the watch's construction, not a standard component of any Cartier I'd ever worked on. A small cylinder, barely visible, wedged into a space that shouldn't exist. My hands went still. I leaned closer, my loop forgotten in my pocket, my naked eyes straining against the dim light reflecting off marble. The cylinder was perhaps half an inch long, metallic, sealed at both ends. It sat in a compartment that had been carved into the watch's movement with Swiss-level craftsmanship, the kind of modification that would cost thousands of dollars and require a specialist most collectors didn't know existed. Someone had hidden something inside this watch. Someone who understood exactly what they were doing. Margaret had taken the Cartier to New York 2 years before her death. For cleaning, she'd said, a trip that lasted 2 days when a cleaning should have taken hours. I reached down and extracted the cylinder with fingers that knew better than to tremble. It weighed almost nothing. Inside, I could feel something shifting, something thin and flexible. I slipped it into my pocket alongside the broken pieces of the watch. Around me, the Gala was coming back to life. Conversations resumed in careful murmurs. Champagne flowed again. The investors had gotten their show. And now they were processing it the way investors processed everything, calculating implications, measuring risk, deciding what it meant for their portfolios. Bradley stood 30 feet away with his back to me, laughing with a cluster of men in suits that cost more than my car. One of them clapped him on the shoulder. Another raised a glass in toast. They were laughing about something. Maybe me, maybe the watch, maybe the old man on his knees gathering pieces of his dead wife's heart from the floor of a party celebrating everything she'd sacrificed to build. Lily sat alone in her chair, tears streaming down her face, her hands still cupped in front of her where the watch had been. I walked to her, knelt beside her chair, ignoring the fresh protest from my knees, took her hands in mine. "It's going to be okay," I said. He broke it. Her voice was barely audible. "He broke Grandma's watch. I can fix it. I've fixed worse." She looked at me with Margaret's eyes, wet with tears that Margaret would never have let fall in public. "Why is he like this?" I had no answer. I'd been asking myself that question for 15 years. "Keep these safe for me," I said, pressing 3 of the smaller gears into her palm. "When I fix the watch, I'll need them back." She closed her fingers around them, holding them the way she'd held the watch, with careful, spread-fingered support. "I'll keep them safe," she promised. "Forever." I stood. I didn't look at Bradley. I didn't look at Priscilla. I didn't look at the 300 investors who'd watched my son call my dead wife worthless. I walked out of the Peninsula Hotel ballroom with broken pieces in one pocket and a hidden cylinder in the other, and the weight of Margaret's last secret pressing against my leg with every step. The valet tried to offer me a claim ticket. I walked past him without breaking stride. The October air hit my face like cold water, sharp and clarifying after the champagne-scented warmth of the ballroom. I stood on the sidewalk and breathed, filling my lungs with city air that smelled like exhaust and lake water, and the particular metallic tang of Chicago in autumn. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could see Bradley raising another toast. The investors applauded something he'd said. Priscilla smiled, her careful, calculated smile. None of them knew what Margaret had hidden in that watch. None of them knew what I'd just found. I walked toward my car with measured steps, the cylinder pressing against my thigh like a message from beyond the grave. Margaret had prepared for this moment. She'd hidden something in the one place she knew I would eventually look, the one object she knew I would eventually try to restore. When the time was right, I promised her I would know when. And kneeling on that marble floor, gathering pieces of her shattered heart while our son laughed with investors, I knew the time was now. The drive from the Peninsula Hotel to Archer Avenue took 40 minutes through late-night Chicago traffic. The streetlights blurred past like orange ghosts. My hand stayed in my pocket the whole way, fingers wrapped around the broken pieces of Margaret's watch. Harvey Boone's shop sat between a closed bakery and a pawn shop that hadn't been opened since 2019. The storefront windows still displayed pocket watches and mantel clocks from the 1990s, their prices faded to illegibility by 20 years of sun. A light burned in the back room. Harvey kept odd hours, always had. Cubs games and restoration work, that was his retirement. I parked on the street and walked to the side entrance, the one Harvey left unlocked for friends who knew to use it. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. Machine oil and brass polish and decades of dust on velvet. Harvey's workbench light cast a cone of white in the darkness, and I could see his silhouette hunched over something small, a loop pressed to his eye. "Harvey." He looked up. His face had the weathered texture of a man who'd spent 60 years squinting at tiny mechanisms, deep lines around his eyes, skin like leather left in the sun. He set down his tools and reached for the lamp switch. Frank. The overhead fluorescence flickered on, revealing the full chaos of his shop. Parts bins overflowing, half-finished projects on every surface. A small TV in the corner showing Cubs highlights with the sound off. "You look like hell. Feel like it, too." I crossed to his workbench and emptied my pockets onto the scarred maple surface, the broken case, the shattered dial in 3 pieces. Gears and springs and screws scattered like the aftermath of a small explosion. Harvey leaned forward, his eyes moving over the wreckage with professional assessment. "That's the Cartier," he said. "Margaret's grandfather's piece." Was. What happened? I told him. The Gala. Bradley's speech about worthless junk from a worthless woman. Lily's scream, the crack of gold against marble. Harvey's hands curled into fists on the workbench. That boy. He shook his head slowly. Remember when he asked about escapements? Couldn't have been more than 12. Thought he was going to follow you into the trade. What the hell happened to him? I don't know. Margaret would have torn him apart for this. Margaret's not here. I pointed to the broken case. But she left something behind. Harvey followed my finger to the anomaly I'd spotted on the Gala floor. The compartment behind where the balance wheel had sat, cracked open by the impact, revealing a space that shouldn't exist in any pocket watch ever made. He pulled his loop down and bent close. For 30 seconds, he didn't move, didn't breathe, just studied the modification with the intensity of a man encountering something new after 50 years of seeing everything. Frank, his voice had changed. The anger was still there, but something else had joined it. I've never seen anything like this. Neither have I. He straightened and looked at me. Someone modified this watch. Someone who knew what they were doing. That compartment, the way it's integrated into the movement, whoever did this was Swiss level. Maybe better. Margaret took it to New York 2 years before she died. Said it needed cleaning. Cleaning doesn't take 2 days. And it doesn't cost what this modification would have cost. Harvey pulled on a pair of cotton gloves from the box he kept by his tools. Let's see what she hid. We worked together the way we'd worked for 40 years, passing tools without speaking, moving in the practiced rhythm of men who understood the same craft at the same level. Harvey held the broken case steady while I extracted the small cylinder from its hidden chamber. It came free with a soft click, light in my gloved fingers. Sealed at both ends, Harvey observed. Looks like a film canister. I twisted the cap and it opened with a whisper of pressurized air. Inside, rolled tight enough to fit, was a strip of 35mm microfilm, and behind it, folded into a square no larger than a postage stamp, a piece of paper. I knew the paper before I unfolded it. Cream-colored, heavy stock. Margaret's personal stationery, the kind with her initials embossed in the corner. She'd ordered it from a shop on Michigan Avenue the year we got married, used it for everything that mattered. My fingers trembled against the paper as I spread the letter flat on Harvey's workbench. The handwriting wavered. The medications had done that, made her grip uncertain in her final months. But the words were unmistakably hers, arranged with the clarity and precision of a woman who'd spent 18 years typing legal documents. My dearest Franklin, if you're reading this, then our boy has finally shown his true face. I'm sorry I couldn't fix him, but I could protect you. I stopped, read the lines again. Margaret's voice in my head, as clear as if she were standing beside me. You know about the fire. March 2004, Bradley's office, all the original documents destroyed. I never believed it was an accident. The timing was too convenient, the insurance payout too smooth. Our son learned to cover his tracks somewhere, and I don't know where, but he learned. After the fire, I started making preparations. The original deed, the one we signed in 2008, I'd kept a copy in my safety deposit box since the day we filed it. Bradley didn't know. He assumed his father and I were trusting fools who didn't understand business. He was half right. Your father was trusting. I never was. I contacted specialists in Geneva through an old client at Kirkland & Ellis. A man named Roulet, retired, but still taking work for people who needed absolute discretion. He built the compartment you found. 3 months of work, $22,000. Worth every penny, $22,000. Margaret had never mentioned it. Our savings, our careful budgeting, and she'd spent $22,000 on a modification I'd never noticed. The microfilm contains images of the original 2008 deed. Not copies, Franklin. The originals themselves, photographed under archival conditions by a professional documentation service before I had them stored. The deed shows what Bradley has tried to erase, that you are the sole owner of what became Yates Holdings. Bradley was listed as operational manager, with a path to ownership through performance milestones. He never met those milestones. The transfer never happened. The company has always been yours. I stopped reading. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Harvey stood beside me, silent, his eyes on the letter. The company has always been yours. $2.3 billion in managed assets. The glass penthouse, the Rolex collection, the TED Talks and magazine profiles, and the 300 investors who'd watched my son call my dead wife worthless, built on a foundation he didn't own, built on my name, on the signature I'd put on a piece of paper 18 years ago. I hoped he would change. I prayed every day that he would remember who raised him, who loved him, who gave him everything. I wanted to believe the grateful boy who wept at our dinner table was still inside the man who introduced his in-laws at galas while we watched from home. But if you're reading this, my love, then that hope is gone. The watch is broken. Our son broke it. And now you know what I've known since 2014. Bradley will take everything if you let him. He'll rewrite history until we never existed. He'll raise Lily to believe she came from nothing but his own brilliance. Don't let him. The company was always yours, Franklin. Every dollar he made, every building he bought, every investor he charmed, built on your foundation, your sacrifice, your name on that deed. Use it, not for revenge, for Lily, for the truth, for the memory of the woman who loved you for 40 years and spent her last ones making sure you'd have this weapon when you needed it most. Yours always, Margaret. I set the letter down. Harvey didn't speak. He walked to the small TV, turned it off, and came back to stand beside me. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of what Margaret had done. She always was the smart one, Harvey said finally, saw this coming years before anyone else. I picked up the strip of microfilm, held it to the light. I could see something on it, shadows and shapes that might have been text, might have been signatures, might have been the proof of everything Margaret had written. I need to see it. Harvey nodded and crossed to a filing cabinet against the far wall. He rummaged through the bottom drawer and produced a device that looked like it belonged in a museum, a microfilm reader, the kind libraries used before everything went digital. Keep it for estate appraisals, he said. Old collectors sometimes have documents stored this way. Never thought I'd be using it for something like this. He set it on the workbench and plugged it in. The screen flickered to life with a soft blue glow. I fed the microfilm strip into the reader with steady fingers. The mechanism caught and pulled, and the screen filled with an image so clear it might have been printed yesterday. The 2008 sole proprietorship agreement. Margaret's careful typing, each letter perfectly aligned. The header read, Deed of Ownership in capital letters, followed by blocks of legal text in the dense format she'd learned at Kirkland and Ellis. I read the key passage aloud, my voice strange in my own ears. Franklin Yates, hereinafter referred to as owner, maintains sole and complete ownership of the business entity described herein. Bradley Yates, hereinafter referred to as manager, shall serve in an operational capacity with a path to ownership transfer contingent upon the following performance milestones. The milestones were listed below. Revenue targets, profit margins, a timeline for gradual transfer of ownership stakes. None of it had ever happened. Bradley had taken control without meeting a single condition. At the bottom of the document, 2 signatures. Mine, in the careful hand I'd used for legal papers. Margaret's, witnessing. A notary stamp dated January 15, 2008. The seed investment amount written in Margaret's handwriting, $127,000. Harvey set down the reader, said nothing for a long moment. She thought of everything, he said. The microfilm format, the hidden compartment, the way she triggered it. She knew you'd try to restore the watch after Bradley broke it. She knew you'd find the modification. She knew our son. I stared at the screen. The proof of ownership, the evidence of fraud, the weapon Margaret had spent her final years preparing. But proof wasn't enough, not for what this would require. I needed validation, documentation, something that would hold up in a courtroom when Bradley's lawyers tried to call it a forgery. Eleanor Cheng, I said. Harvey nodded. I worked with her on the Patterson estate, questioned documents, spectral analysis, the whole 9 yards. She's good, Frank. Best in the Midwest. Can you call her? He checked his watch. 2:47 a.m. She won't answer tonight, but first thing in the morning, I'll have her here. I gathered the microfilm, the letter, the broken pieces of the watch. Evidence of love, evidence of betrayal, evidence of everything Bradley had tried to erase. I'll stay, I said, if that's all right. Harvey gestured to the old couch against the wall, covered in watch parts and dust and the detritus of half a century in the trade. Make yourself comfortable. Coffee's always on. I didn't sleep. I sat at Harvey's workbench with Margaret's letter in front of me, reading it again and again until the words burned themselves into my memory. The medications had made her handwriting shake, but her mind had stayed sharp until the end. Sharp enough to see what I couldn't. Sharp enough to prepare for what I wouldn't let myself believe. At 8 a.m., Harvey made the call. Eleanor Cheng arrived at 9:30. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-50s, with silver streaked through black hair. Her handshake was firm, her equipment case heavy in her other hand. She moved like someone who'd spent decades examining documents for signs of fraud and had stopped being surprised by any of it. "Mr. Yates," she said. Harvey explained the situation. "I'm sorry about your wife." "Thank you. Show me what you found." I laid out the materials on Harvey's workbench. The microfilm. The letter. The broken watch with its hidden compartment exposed. Eleanor studied each piece without touching, her eyes moving in the systematic pattern of a professional assessment. "The compartment is recent work," she said, "within the last 5 years. Swiss craftsmanship, possibly Geneva. I've seen similar modifications in cases involving disputed inheritances. Very expensive, very professional. My wife had it done 2 years before she died." Eleanor nodded. She opened her case and began removing equipment. A portable spectral analyzer. A UV light source. Magnification lenses. A small device I didn't recognize. "The microfilm first," she said. She handled the strip with cotton gloves, feeding it into a specialized reader far more sophisticated than Harvey's antique. Numbers scrolled across her laptop screen as the machine analyzed the film stock. The hum of the equipment filled the small shop. "Chemical markers in the emulsion layer," she explained. "Different manufacturers, different years. This particular stock was discontinued in 2012. The images on this microfilm were created before that date. Which means this film predates the 2014 fire your wife mentioned in her letter." She moved to the document images themselves, zooming in on specific elements. The typewriter font, the notary stamp, the signatures. "The typewriter signature matches EBM Selectric II, she said. "Correct for 2008 business documents. The notary stamp shows wear patterns consistent with heavy use over decades, and the paper stock visible in the image matches manufacturing standards for legal documents in the late 2000s. She looked up from her laptop. "Mr. Yates, this document is authentic. The microfilm was created between 2008 and 2012 as a preservation copy of an original 2008 deed. The chain of custody your wife established is solid. This would hold up in any courtroom in the country." My breath caught. The fluorescent lights seemed to dim at the edges. "There's something else you should understand," Eleanor said. Her voice flattened. Her eyes fixed on the documents the way Margaret's had when she drafted legal papers. "I lost my own parents to a business swindle. A partner who falsified documents claimed sole ownership of a restaurant they'd built together for 30 years. I know what this kind of betrayal feels like." She closed her laptop and faced me directly. "Mr. Yates, this isn't just an ownership dispute. If your son filed new incorporation documents after the 2014 fire knowing these originals existed, that's fraud. Criminal fraud. Securities fraud, if those false filings were used to raise investor capital. Insurance fraud, if the fire was deliberately set. We're talking about federal charges." I looked at the authenticated deed on Eleanor's screen. My name, my signature, my company. $2.3 billion in managed assets. Every press interview, every TED Talk, every claim of being self-made, all of it built on a lie. And I held the proof. 2 days after Eleanor authenticated the documents, I sat across from Randall Kirby in his office on the 17th floor of a building on LaSalle Street that had been old when my father was young. The wood paneling had absorbed decades of cigar smoke and settlement negotiations. The leather chairs had cradled clients who'd lost everything and clients who'd taken everything from someone else. Eleanor's authentication report and the microfilmed deed lay spread between us on his desk. Randall was a compact man in his early 60s, silver hair cropped close, hands that looked like they'd done manual work before they'd learned to shuffle legal documents. His father had been a machinist in Gary, Indiana. I'd learned that from Harvey, who'd worked with Randall on the Patterson estate dispute, the kind of attorney who remembered where he came from and took particular interest in cases where working people got cheated by the ones who were supposed to love them. Randall finished reading the last page of Eleanor's report. He set it down and removed his reading glasses. Mr. Yates, your son committed securities fraud, insurance fraud, and falsified corporate filings. His voice was flat, the way doctors sound when they've given bad news so many times they've learned to strip the emotion from it. The ownership question is actually the least of his problems. I sat with that for a long moment. The traffic noise from LaSalle Street filtered up through the old windows. I don't want to destroy him, Randall. He's still my son. Randall leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. Then what do you want? I'd been asking myself that question since I found the microfilm. Every night in my workshop, staring at Margaret's photograph, trying to separate what I wanted from what she would have wanted. What Bradley deserved from what Lily needed. I want Lily protected. I want the truth acknowledged. And I want Bradley to understand what he threw away. Randall picked up a pen and wrote something on a yellow legal pad. Protection for your granddaughter I can do. Truth acknowledgement is trickier but manageable. Understanding? He shook his head. That's not something courts can compel, Mr. Yates. That's something your son has to find on his own. I know, but I can create conditions that might encourage him to look. He explained what would happen next. A formal discovery request to Yates Holdings' legal team. Documentation demands that would force Bradley to produce records he'd assumed were destroyed. The kind of legal pressure that sent signals through corporate networks faster than any email. Once this hits their desks, word will spread, Randall said. Your son's attorneys will know something's wrong before he does. Some of them will become very busy with other matters. And Bradley? He'll realize something's happening when the people who usually take his calls stop answering. Randall smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Give it 2 weeks. He'll come to you. I signed the retainer agreement. Randall walked me to the elevator. Mr. Yates, he held the door open with one hand. I've handled a lot of ownership disputes. Families torn apart over money, over property, over perceived slights that festered for decades. Most of them end badly for everyone involved. What makes them end differently? When someone decides that being right matters less than what happens after. He let the door close between us. I'll be in touch. The discovery request went out on a Thursday. By Monday, Bradley's regular attorneys at Mitchell & Price were unavailable. His backup firm, Kramer Associates, cited a conflict of interest they'd never mentioned before. A partner at Kirkland & Ellis, the same firm where Margaret had worked for 18 years, called Bradley's office and left a message that was never returned. I heard about all of this from Randall, who tracked the corporate whisper network with the practiced eye of a man who'd spent 30 years learning its rhythms. They're distancing themselves, he said during our second call. Nobody wants to be standing next to him when this breaks. 2 weeks to the day after Randall sent the discovery request, I was in my workshop restoring a music box from 1847, a LeCoultre with a 30-inch cylinder, one of the largest ever made. The pins had worn down over a century and a half of playing the same 12 melodies. I was replacing them one at a time, a process that would take weeks. The shop door banged open hard enough to rattle the tools on my pegboard. Bradley stood in the doorway in a suit that cost more than my car. His face had the tight, controlled expression of a man who'd been holding anger for days and had finally found somewhere to put it. What the hell are you doing? I didn't look up from the music box. The pen I was setting required precision. A millimeter off, and the note would play flat for the next 100 years. Sit down, Bradley. I don't have time for sit down. Bradley's hand froze on the doorframe. He hadn't heard that tone from me before. Neither had I. But something had changed. Margaret had changed it when she hid that document in the watch. Eleanor had changed it when she authenticated the proof. Randall had changed it when he sent the discovery request that scattered Bradley's lawyers like pigeons. I had power now, and my son could hear it. He sat in the chair across from my workbench. The same chair where he'd sat at 12 years old, asking about escapements and balance wheels. The same chair where Margaret had sat during her final months, watching me work while the cancer took her piece by piece. I set down my tools and reached into the drawer beside me. The microfilmed deed, printed now on archival paper, crisp and official with Eleanor's authentication stamp. I slid it across the workbench. Bradley picked it up. His hands were steady at first. Then they weren't. I watched his face as he read, the color drained from his features, the artificial tan looking like makeup on a corpse. The confidence that came from 15 years of success emptied out of him like water from a cracked vessel. His eyes moved across the document, once, twice, 3 times, as if repetition might change what was written there. This can't be real. His voice had lost its boardroom authority. The fire, your mother kept a copy. She hid it in the watch you destroyed. Bradley looked up. His eyes were wet. I produced Margaret's letter. The cream-colored stationery with her initials embossed in the corner. The handwriting that wavered from the medications but never lost its clarity. Read it. He took the letter. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. I watched my son read his mother's final words. Her hope that he would change. Her prayers that the grateful boy who wept at their dinner table still existed somewhere inside the man who introduced his in-laws at Gala's while his parents watched from home. Her devastating clarity about who he'd become. If you're reading this, my love, then our boy has finally shown his true face. When Bradley finished, there were tears on his cheeks. Real tears. The kind I hadn't seen since that Christmas dinner 18 years ago when he'd promised to repay us tenfold. I didn't. His voice cracked. I never meant you threw the watch because you were embarrassed by your mother. In front of 300 people. In front of your daughter. I let that sit. Let it fill the workshop the way Margaret's music boxes used to fill it with their songs. The company was never yours, Bradley. Every milestone your mother required, you never met them. The transfer never happened. Legally, it's been mine for 18 years. Bradley's jaw tightened. Something of the old defiance flickered in his eyes. I'll fight this. I have lawyers. Your lawyers won't return your calls. I know. Randall Kirby says you'd lose anyway. Worse, you'd face criminal charges for the 2014 fire. I paused. Insurance fraud. Securities fraud. Falsifying corporate documents. The defiance faded. His shoulders dropped. Did you set that fire, Bradley? Silence. The only sound was traffic from Archer Avenue, muffled by the old walls of my shop. That silence was all the confession I needed. I'm offering you terms, I said. Voluntary transfer of 40% ownership to a trust for Lily. Public acknowledgement of your parents' founding investment in all company materials. And your commitment to family therapy. Bradley's head came up. Therapy? Not for me. For you, to understand what you've become. And if I accept these terms, I don't pursue criminal charges. You keep 60% of what you built. Lily is protected. The truth is acknowledged. And if I don't, then I let Randall take everything. Not for me. I met my son's eyes. For your mother, who you called worthless. For Lily, who watched you become a monster. Bradley stood. His suit was wrinkled from sitting, from the stress of reading documents that unraveled everything he'd built. He looked smaller than when he'd walked in, diminished. You have 1 week to decide, I said. He left without a word. The door closed behind him, none of the drama of his entrance. I sat alone in my workshop with Margaret's photograph watching from the shelf and the half-restored music box waiting for pins that would play true for another 100 years. The week unfolded in stages. Day 1, Bradley hired a private investigator who specialized in discrediting witnesses and finding procedural flaws in legal documentation. The investigator spent 3 days examining Eleanor's authentication process and found nothing actionable. Her work was clean. Day 2, Bradley called an offshore attorney in the Caymans. He asked about restructuring assets beyond the reach of American courts. The attorney told him it was too late. The discovery request had already frozen everything. Any asset movement now would constitute additional fraud. Day 3, Bradley reached out to Priscilla's family lawyers. The Winthrops had maintained relationships with old money attorneys in Boston for generations. The kind of lawyers who knew how to make problems disappear for the right clients. They declined the meeting. Word had reached them about what was coming. The Winthrops didn't associate with fraud cases. On the 4th day, Priscilla filed for divorce. I learned about it from Randall, who tracked the filing with professional interest. She's protecting Winthrop assets, he said over the phone, moving fast before the public fallout contaminates her position. Does Bradley know yet? She had him served this morning at his office, in front of his remaining staff. I thought about Priscilla at that first Christmas dinner in our home. The cashmere coat. The suggestion that we do dinner somewhere nice instead. The way she'd looked at Margaret's music boxes like they were evidence of a disease she didn't want to catch. She'd married what Bradley represented, and now that representation was crumbling. On the fifth day, a tech journalist named Sarah Chen called Bradley's office. She worked for a publication that covered the venture capital world, and she asked for comment on rumors about fraudulent founding documents at Yates Holdings. Bradley's assistant told her he was unavailable. Sarah Chen published a speculative piece that afternoon. No accusations, just questions. Enough to start the conversation in circles that mattered. I didn't plant the story. I didn't need to. The corporate whisper network had done its work. When enough lawyers become too busy to take your calls, people notice. People talk, and eventually, someone with a byline starts asking questions. On the sixth day, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. "Dad?" Bradley's voice sounded different, hollowed out. The confidence that had carried him through 15 years of self-made mythology was gone. "I accept your terms." I closed my eyes. Margaret's photograph watched from the shelf across the room. "The documents will be ready tomorrow," I said. Randall's office. 9 a.m., silence on the line. "Then, Mom really kept that deed all those years?" "She kept a lot of things you didn't know about." More silence. I could hear Bradley breathing, the sound of a man who'd run out of options and was only now understanding how far he'd fallen. "I should have visited more." "When she was sick?"
"Yes."
"You should have." She must have hated me at the end. I thought about Margaret's letter, the hope she'd carried until she couldn't carry it anymore. The prayers she'd said for a son who'd stopped deserving them. She loved you. That's what made it hurt so much. Bradley made a sound that might have been a sob. The connection went dead. I set down the phone and walked to my workbench. The 1847 LeCoultre tray waited, its cylinder half restored, its pins partially replaced. Another week of work, maybe 2, and it would play again for the first time in decades. Some things could be fixed with patience and skill. Some things couldn't. But Margaret had given me the tools to try, and tomorrow, for Lily's sake, I would use them. The Wall Street Journal broke the story on a Tuesday morning in January. I found out the way most people find out about news now. My phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m. with a text from Harvey Boone. 3 words, "Check the journal." The headline filled my screen before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Yates Holdings founder concealed parents' seed investment, original ownership structure. Beneath it, a photograph of Bradley at last year's gala, champagne raised, smile wide, the ice sculpture bearing his company logo visible over his shoulder. The article ran 3,000 words. I read every one of them standing at my kitchen counter while the coffee grew cold in my hands. The article included Eleanor Cheng's authentication report, her credentials listed in full. Forensic document specialist, 30 years of experience. Her analysis of the microfilmed deed described in language dry enough for a courtroom but clear enough for anyone to understand. The document is authentic. The chain of custody is solid. Excerpts from Margaret's letter appeared later in the piece. Not the whole thing, but the parts that mattered. "If you're reading this, my love, then our boy has shown his true face. I'm sorry I couldn't fix him, but I could protect you." Her voice, reaching from beyond the grave into newsprint. The article included clips from Bradley's TED Talk, screenshots of the moments where he'd claimed self-made status, where he'd talked about building something from nothing, where he'd described the loneliness of being a visionary in a world that didn't understand. The journalist had placed these clips beside the deed. Side by side, the lie and the truth. I set down my phone and looked out the window at Margaret's garden, dormant now in the January cold. The roses she'd planted 20 years ago were bare stems against the gray sky. Bradley had spent 15 years erasing his working-class origins. Now that erasure had become the story. The investors fled first. I learned this from Randall Kirby the following Monday. His voice carried the measured satisfaction of a man watching predictions come true. 3 major limited partners withdrew this morning, he said. Combined assets of $400 million. They cited material misrepresentations about company leadership. What does that mean in practice? It means they don't want their money managed by someone who lied about how he built his company. These are people who pride themselves on due diligence. Being caught backing a fraud makes them look foolish. I thought about the Gala, the 300 investors in their designer gowns and tailored suits, the champagne towers and ice sculptures. The way they'd watched Bradley throw the watch and said nothing. What happens to the portfolio companies? They're distancing themselves. Nobody wants a fraud investigation touching their cap tables. I've heard from 3 founders already who are restructuring to remove Yates Holdings from their documentation. The network Bradley had spent 15 years building was dissolving like sugar in water. The calls stopped coming first. Podcast hosts who'd once begged for interviews had scheduling conflicts that stretched into infinity. A producer from a business documentary series emailed Bradley's assistant to say their project had been indefinitely postponed. A tech journalist who'd written glowing profiles called to say she was working on a follow-up piece and wanted comment. Bradley didn't comment. Bradley wasn't commenting on anything anymore. The case studies vanished next. Randall sent me a link to a business school database where Bradley's visionary leadership had once been required reading. The page returned a 404 error. File not found, as if the lessons of his success had never existed. The TED organization issued a brief statement. In light of recent revelations about the accuracy of certain claims made during Bradley Yates's 2023 presentation, we have removed the video from our platform. They didn't elaborate. They didn't need to. The headlines accumulated on my kitchen table. The journal article spawned others. The Tribune ran a profile of Margaret, pieced together from interviews with former colleagues at Kirkland and Ellis who remembered the sharp legal secretary who'd understood contracts better than most lawyers. The Sun-Times focused on the working-class angle, the South Side family whose sacrifice had launched an empire that erased them. I read them all. I closed the browser tab after the 3rd day, made coffee. The headlines kept coming. I stopped reading them. What I felt was Margaret's absence. The empty chair at my kitchen table where she'd sat for 40 years. The silence where her voice should have been. The garden outside my window that no one tended anymore. She'd wanted this. She'd prepared for this. She'd spent her final years making sure I'd have the weapons I needed when Bradley showed his true face. But she wasn't here to see it. And I couldn't shake the feeling that she would have found no joy in watching her son destroyed, even the son who'd called her worthless. The social humiliation cut deeper than the financial losses. Priscilla's divorce filing became public 3 weeks after the journal article. The documents cited irreconcilable differences and fundamental dishonesty in language so cold it might have been describing a business transaction rather than a marriage. The Winthrop family issued a statement through their publicist. We support Priscilla during this difficult time and have no comment on Mr. Yates's personal legal matters. The distancing had begun. Bradley's country club membership came up for review at the February board meeting. I learned this from Randall, who had contacts everywhere. The review was a formality. The outcome was predetermined. Bradley would be asked to resign before they had to vote. His charity board positions evaporated one by one. The Children's Hospital Foundation, the literacy program he'd helped fund, the Arts Council where he'd sat beside other donors in meetings he rarely attended. Each organization issued similar statements. We thank Mr. Yates for his past contributions and wish him well in his future endeavors. The salon where he'd gotten his bi-weekly haircut for 7 years sent a polite email suggesting he might be more comfortable elsewhere. They didn't explain why. They didn't need to. I thought about the Bradley who'd sat at our kitchen table in 2008, weeping with gratitude, promising to repay us tenfold. That boy had cared about things other than country club memberships and charity boards. That boy had understood what sacrifice meant. Where had he gone? With investors fleeing and lawsuits accumulating, Yates Holdings entered its death spiral in March. The glass penthouse office in the West Loop surrendered to a WeWork sublease. The furniture Bradley had chosen with such care, the the floor-to-ceiling windows with their view of Lake Michigan, the floating glass desk with no visible cables. Strangers occupied it now. The first edition library went to Sotheby's in April. I saw the auction listing online. 73 volumes, including a first printing of The Great Gatsby and a signed Hemingway. The estimated value was $200,000. The actual sale brought $112,000. Less than Bradley had paid for any three of them. The Rolex collection followed in May. 7 watches, one for each day of the week. I could have identified the movement in any of them by sound alone. Bradley couldn't have identified them at all. He'd worn them as status symbols, the way a child wears a costume. Now they were numbered lots in a catalog, their new owners unknown. The divorce settlement consumed what remained. Priscilla's lawyers were thorough and merciless. They picked through the wreckage of Bradley's empire and extracted everything the law allowed. The investor lawsuits took the rest. By June, Bradley Yates had less than he'd had in 1987 when he first sat at our dining room table with a business plan and a dream. The cruelest irony wasn't the money. It was the loneliness. He'd ended up exactly where he started, but without the parents who believed in him, without the mother who'd drafted the paperwork that gave him his chance, without the father who'd taken a second mortgage on his home because his son had a vision. I thought about this on the evenings when I sat in my workshop with Margaret's photograph watching from the shelf. The sunset ritual continued. The music boxes played their songs, but now I played them for myself and sometimes for Lily when she visited. The trust securing Lily's 40% ownership had been established in February. Randall had structured it with multiple layers of protection. No one could touch it. Not Bradley, not Priscilla, not the creditors circling what remained of the Yates Holdings carcass. Lily would be fine. That was what mattered. She started coming to Bridgeport on weekends in March. Priscilla allowed it, perhaps because she was too busy with divorce proceedings to object, perhaps because she'd recognized that her daughter needed something she couldn't provide. The first weekend, Lily sat in the chair where Bradley had once sat, asking about escapements and balance wheels. She was still 8, her grandmother's fierce intelligence sharpening in her face. "Grandpa, can you teach me about the music boxes?" I showed her the Leckel tray I'd been restoring since before the gala, explained how the pins plucked the comb teeth, demonstrated the tension required when winding, watched her small hands move with the same attention to detail Margaret's had showed. "Grandma loved these," Lily said. It wasn't a question. She did. We used to play them every evening at sunset. She'd pick the song, and I'd wind the box, and we'd listen together. "Can we do that? Pick a song?" I let her choose. She selected a Chopin nocturne, the same piece that had played on Margaret's last day. She couldn't have known that. Some connections don't need to be spoken. The weekends became ritual. Saturday mornings. Lily would arrive with a small overnight bag and the 3 gears I'd given her at the gala, which she kept in a velvet pouch she'd sewn herself. We'd work in the shop together, her questions endless, her patience surprising for a child her age. "Why do the gears have to be exactly right?" she asked one afternoon in April. "Because one wrong gear throws off everything else. The whole mechanism depends on each part doing its job, like a family." I looked at my granddaughter. Margaret's eyes looked back at me. "Yes," I said, "like a family." She asked about her grandmother all the time. What was she like when she was young? What did she sound like when she laughed? What were her favorite songs? I told her everything I could remember. The butcher's daughter from the South Side, with fierce intelligence and opinions she never hesitated to share. The legal secretary who understood contracts better than most lawyers. The woman who planted the garden outside my window and tended it for 30 years. "She sounds brave," Lily said. She was the bravest person I ever knew. I want to be like her. I held my granddaughter close and felt something crack open in my chest. Not grief exactly, something warmer, something that might have been hope. One evening in late June, Lily asked the question I'd been dreading since the first headline appeared. We were in the workshop, the sunset light falling through the window, the way it had fallen across Margaret's face on her last day. The music boxes had finished their songs. The silence held the weight of everything unspoken. "Grandpa, why did Daddy get so mean?" I set down the tweezers I'd been holding, looked at my granddaughter, 8 years old, her father's empire in ruins, her family fractured beyond repair. She deserved an answer. She deserved the truth. But she also deserved to keep something of the father she'd loved before she understood what he'd become. I think, I said, he forgot that some things matter more than money. Your grandmother tried to remind him, but he couldn't hear her anymore. Lily considered this. Her hands rested on the velvet pouch where she kept the gears from the broken watch. I won't forget, she said. I'll remember everything you tell me. I pulled her close. The workshop held us in its familiar embrace, tools on the walls, music boxes on the shelves, Margaret's photograph watching with eyes that would never close. For the first time since she died, I felt something like peace. Bradley called me once, in late October, nearly a year since the gala. His voice had lost its edges. Flat, tired, I got a job, he said. Plast Nuss, logistics company in Milwaukee. Nothing fancy, entry level basically. I didn't know what to say. Lily's doing well, I offered. I know, Priscilla tells me. Says she talks about you all the time. He paused. About Mom. The line crackled with static. Or maybe it was just the sound of 18 years collapsing into silence. I remember sitting at your workbench when I was 12, Bradley said, learning to identify movements by sound. You made it seem like magic. You had a gift for it. I had a gift for a lot of things. His laugh held no humor. Turns out the thing I was best at was forgetting where I came from. I looked at Margaret's photograph. She'd hoped for this moment. She'd prayed for it. But she'd also prepared for the possibility that it would never come. You could come to Chicago sometime, I said. See Lily. See the workshop. Silence on the line. When Bradley spoke again, his voice was thick. Maybe, when I've earned it. He hung up before I could respond. That evening, I played the Chopin Nocturne on the music box Margaret had loved best. The notes filled the workshop with their bittersweet melody. Outside, the garden she'd planted was coming back to life after the winter. The roses were blooming again. Lily would visit this weekend. We'd wind the music boxes together. She'd ask questions about her grandmother, and I'd tell her stories she'd never heard before. Some things couldn't be fixed, no matter how skilled the hands or patient the heart. But some things could be passed down, generation to generation, the way a pocket watch travels through time, keeping faith with everyone who ever wound it. Margaret had understood that. She'd understood it better than anyone, and now so did I. If my story matters to you, tap like and rate it from 1 to 10. Tell me what you think. Thank you. The sunset fell through the workshop window the way it had fallen for 40 years. Same light, same bench, same ritual. Margaret's garden caught the gold outside, her roses blooming in colors she'd chosen decades ago. I sat in my chair with my hands resting on either side of the Cartier pocket watch. 14 months since the gala. 420 evenings of winding music boxes alone. The watch gleamed under my daylight lamp, restored to a condition Margaret's grandfather would have recognized. Every gear back in place. The enamel dial restored to its century-old beauty. Springs tensioned to specification. The hidden compartment remained. Empty now, its purpose fulfilled. I ran my thumb across the edge Margaret had paid $22,000 to create. The craftsmanship deserved to endure. My front door opened without a knock. Footsteps crossed the living room with the confidence of someone who belonged here. Grandpa. Lily appeared in the workshop doorway, almost 9 now, taller than she'd been at the gala. Her overnight bag hung from one shoulder. The velvet pouch, where she kept the gears, dangled from her fingers. She set down her bag and crossed to the workbench. Her eyes found the restored watch. You finished it last week. I wanted to show you first. She leaned close, studying the dial, the case, the way the gold caught the sunset light. Her grandmother's intelligence moved behind her eyes. It's beautiful, like it was never broken. Some things can be fixed, if you have the patience. I picked up the watch and held it in my palm. The weight felt right again, balanced the way a century of careful winding had established. The Hunter case opened with the same soft click it had made since 1923. Your grandmother always meant for this to be yours. I looked at my granddaughter, at Margaret's eyes in a small face. Now it's restored. Now it's time. I placed the watch in her hands. She held it the way I'd taught her, fingertips spread wide, supporting without gripping. The gold case filled her palm, the chain spilling between her fingers. I'll take care of it, forever. I know you will. She traced the edge of the case with her thumb, the same motion I'd made 10,000 times over 40 years. Tell me about her again, about when she was young. We sat together while the sunset deepened outside the window. I told her stories she'd heard before and some she hadn't. The butcher's daughter from the South Side, the legal secretary who understood contracts better than the lawyers she worked for, the woman who'd planted the garden outside my window and tended it for 30 years. Lily listened the way she always listened, with her whole attention, storing everything I said. Bradley had called 3 days ago, his voice tired and tentative. "Dad, how are you?" "Fine. Lily's coming this weekend." "I know," she told me. Pause. "How's the job?" "Honest work. Different. Maybe I could come down sometime. See her. See the workshop." I'd told him maybe. I hadn't promised anything. The door was open. Whether he walked through it was his choice. The sunset reached its peak outside the window. Time for the ritual Margaret and I had shared for 30 years. "Pick a song," I told Lily. She crossed to the shelf where the music boxes waited in their rows. Her fingers moved along them, touching cases she knew by name. She stopped at the Chopin Nocturne. I wound the mechanism with careful turns. The cylinder began to rotate. The pins plucked the comb teeth, and music filled the workshop. Lily sat beside me with the Cartier in her lap. The sunset painted her face in shades of gold. Margaret's photograph watched from the shelf. The ones that last aren't always the fanciest. They're the ones someone wound every day because they loved the song inside. The music box played its final notes and fell silent. Outside, the sunset faded toward dusk. Inside, my granddaughter held her grandmother's watch, and the garden Margaret planted bloomed in colors she'd chosen long ago.